Hello everyone, in this tutorial I want to teach you how to work with the Corona render engine and get you familiar with the basics and fundamentals of using this render engine. First, let's go to the rendering menu, then render setup, and by enabling this option and actually activating the Corona option, the default render engine in your 3D Max will switch to Corona. The settings for the Corona render engine are located in these few tabs. And in this video, we'll get to know some of these options. Before anything else, I need to set up my scene for the camera and frame it. To do this, we go to the Create tab and then to the Camera section. Here you can use the Corona camera option, or from the Corona toolbar, you can come here to Create Corona camera and create a camera for this scene by clicking and dragging. If you press the C key, you'll enter the camera view and can start framing. By pressing Shift and F, the safe frame will be activated, which is essentially the frame you'll see in the final render. If you want to change the aspect ratio of your frame, go to Rendering, Render Setup, and from the Common tab, you can come here to customize and change the aspect ratio. For example, I'll change the aspect ratio to 600 by 800 vertically. By enabling this option, this lock here will lock the width to height ratio, so our aspect ratio will be preserved, and by changing any of these values, the other one will adjust accordingly. Very good. To make my work easier and more efficient, I'll split my viewport layout into two separate sections from this part onward. On the right side of the screen, I press the C key to switch it to the camera view, and by pressing Shift and F, I can see my frame clearly. By pressing F3, I can take it out of wireframe mode and return to a solid view. On the left side, by pressing the P key, I switch it to the perspective view, which gives me a more flexible look at my scene. To make sure my render is always locked to this view, I go to the rendering menu, then to render setup, and by clicking this option here, the render will be locked to this specific viewport. In the camera settings, there are several options that let me work on my framing and camera, and there are actually a lot of different options available. You can get familiar with the various parts of the settings in different tutorials, which go into more detail. This tutorial, however, is just to get you started with the Corona render engine and is meant as an introductory lesson. In this section, the most important option is the field of view, also known as focal length. I recommend using the focal length option, which is basically the camera lens setting. By changing this value, you can make your lens wider or more telephoto. The higher the focal length, the more telephoto your lens is, and the lower you go from 50 or 60, the wider your lens becomes. If you decrease it a lot, you'll have a super wide lens, which can be useful for certain shots. Very good. I'll increase this value a bit and set my frame with a focal length of 70, which gives a nice balanced look. Great, that's it for my camera settings, and now we have a relatively well-defined camera. I'll adjust my camera a bit more to get a smoother and more balanced view of the scene. For lighting, I go to the Lights section under the Corona category. We have Corona Sun, which is used to create natural light, basically the sun and sky, and Corona Light, which is for creating artificial lights like chandeliers, lamps, hidden lights, and halogen lights. First, I'll control the natural light in my scene. By clicking and dragging into the project, I can create the Corona sun, and by adjusting the angle, I set the sun's direction. This is our sun, it's just an icon, and the actual sun is placed extremely far away in the virtual environment. If you extend this line, imagine the sun thousands of kilometers away. This is the angle of sunlight. I go to Modify, and by clicking Add Corona Sky, I activate the sky as well, which completes the natural lighting setup. Now, let's do a test render. Let's take our very first render with the Corona render engine. I can go to the Corona toolbar, and by clicking Start Interactive Rendering in Corona VFB, I start rendering. A message pops up here, and I'll disable my film for now. Alright, now we have our first render with the Corona render engine. Using the simple exposure option, I can change the overall brightness of my image, but if I just want to adjust the sunlight, I can go into the parameters, find intensity, and by lowering it, make the sunlight weaker. There's also a size option for the sun. The higher it is, the softer the shadows become, which makes the scene more appealing. I'll reduce the sunlight so it's generally weak. And I'll also lower the simple exposure value, for example, to -1 to get this kind of lighting. By moving the sun, I can see different lighting angles and choose the best one. As you can see, the background here is the skylight, and it's basically a virtual hemisphere. Below this hemisphere is considered the ground. Our horizon line is right here. This window is called the frame buffer, and the post-process settings for color and light correction are located here. We can also use the auto adjustment option here to control the lighting, but I won't get into that now. In the tone mapping section, there are options like white balance, which lets you control the warmth or coolness of your image by adjusting it. You can also increase or decrease the contrast, and there are other options available in this tab. In this tab, you get some basic information about your render, and in the History tab, you can use it to review your previous renders. Here is the distributed rendering section, which is for connecting multiple computers together for rendering. There's also the light mix option, which I'll definitely explain to you. This allows you to adjust your lights even after rendering. There are also some options at the top, like changing the zoom, splitting the viewport, showing or hiding settings, and other options. To save your render, you can use this option and save your image in any format you like. Very good. Now, if I want to import an object into my scene, I can use the import option and download various objects. But the Chaos Group company has added a tool to V-Ray and Corona in recent years called the Cosmos browser. By activating the Cosmos browser, I can access a large library of materials, 3D models, and different HDRIs, which you can download and use on your system. So I'll go to the furniture section, then to sofas, and select a sofa to bring into the scene so we can see how to do this together. For example, I'll choose an option from here. Now you can test and check out different options to see which one you find more appealing or suitable for your specific needs. For example, I'll use this option, click on Import From, and very simply and easily the model is imported into the scene. I'll place it in the area I have in mind, making sure it fits well with the overall layout. If you need to mirror your model, you can use the mirror tool, which is a very useful feature for adjusting the orientation of your objects. I'll mirror the model along the x-axis and place it in this section, ensuring it aligns properly with the rest of the scene. If you have another model in mind, you can select it. This part requires some patience, so you can pick the model that really fits your project and matches your vision. For example, I'll import another model now, just to show you how the process works. Let's see how quickly and easily we can bring different models into the project, making it more dynamic and interesting. Very good. I'll use this section again and quickly import a few more objects, demonstrating how flexible and efficient this workflow can be. You can go to different sections and start adding various objects to your work, experimenting with different arrangements and combinations. For example, I'll select this table as well, just to add more variety to the scene. I'm not being too picky here about whether the models are perfectly matched in terms of design principles. I'll just test a few models to see which one fits my scene better and looks more attractive. So, for instance, I'll use this one, delete the other, and place this here, making adjustments as needed. I'll add a few more objects in the same way, repeating the process to fill out the scene. All right, I've added a few items to the scene, and now it's starting to come together. Now, we need to do a test render to see how everything looks in the final output. If something isn't quite right, for example, maybe this plant is too dark for the scene, you can make adjustments as needed. I changed the sofa, and now I've decided to change the frame as well to better match the new arrangement. That means depending on the scene arrangement when we're doing a test render, we can also change our frame afterward to improve the composition. Very good. I'll move back a bit to get a better view of the entire scene. Here, I want to teach you a new option that can be very helpful. In the camera settings, there's an option called clipping that we can use when the camera moves outside the project boundaries. I'll go to the camera settings, then to the environment and clipping section, and activate clipping to control what is visible in the viewport. We need to increase the near clipping option so that it matches the distance from the camera to this wall, ensuring that objects close to the camera are not accidentally cut off. I'll increase it a bit more, carefully adjusting the value to get the best result. After increasing it, if you click Show in Viewport, you'll see a line here that represents the clipping boundary. Let's look at it from the top view. This line is the cut line that's happening, and it actually shows us everything beyond the wall, making it easier to understand what will be visible in the final render. This feature is especially useful when you want to control the visibility of objects and ensure that your scene looks exactly the way you want it to. To make my scene more attractive. So you have a very simple scene here. I'll move this plant a bit. I think it probably needs to be changed entirely as it's a very full plant and doesn't really suit this scene. Now, let's move on to assigning materials. Again, we can use the Cosmos browser. This time I'll go to the materials section. For example, I'll use wood flooring, select the floor, and then look through the available materials. We need to test and assign materials based on the conditions we want for our scene. Here I want to show you a few options. First, for those who have worked with 3D Max before, you know that we definitely need to check the UVW map for our floor material. I'll remove the UV here. When we want to assign a material, there's an option called Use Real World Scale. If we activate this and assign the material, let me assign the material to this floor. Provided that we've modeled the scene to the correct scale. For example, if I've set the unit system to centimeters in the system setup, when I assign the UVW map and activate the real world option, the sizes will be correct and there's no need for further editing. Ultimately, if we want, we can use the gizmo to adjust things in the scene. By moving the gizmo, which is the tool that allows us to manipulate objects within our scene, we can shift our texture to a different position, or by rotating it, we can change its orientation to better fit our design needs. Now, if we don't like the texture or its color, we can simply change the material and use another material or texture, for example, to achieve the look we want. I'll check that the Use Real World option is enabled, which ensures that our textures are mapped according to real world scale, then change my material so I can select the color I have in mind, making sure it matches my vision for the project. Now, I just want to show you how you can use Corona's features, which are very powerful and flexible for rendering and material adjustments. So let's move on to these wall coverings we have in our scene. For example, I can use different types, colors, and materials for them, depending on the style or mood I want to create. Here, for instance, I'll use this option, which allows me to demonstrate the versatility of the material editor and how easily you can swap between different looks to find the one that best suits your needs. Wall paint, or if we want a bit more texture, I'll use this. We assign a UVW map to it, set it to box mapping, enable the Use Real World option, and for the panel, for example, I can use this, which is just a solid color. Let me select the rest of the body as well. Great, I've assigned this material to the rest of the body as well. Now, if we want to edit the materials, by pressing the M key and opening the material editor window and using the Pick Material option, we can select our material. As you can see, the material that was pre-made by Chaos Group and that we've assigned to the scene appears for us. If you know how to work with Corona material settings, you can change the options, but that's beyond the scope of this tutorial and actually requires separate lessons, which I'll cover in detail in future episodes where I'll teach you all about Corona materials and how to use them. For now, we just want to use the basic features so you can quickly and easily set up a scene and get it ready for rendering. So I'll hit the interactive button again and let's review together to see what's happened and how our scene looks. And basically what state it's actually turning into right now. All right, let's give it a moment so the render can complete. Here it's become very yellow, which is probably because of the light we have here and of course the material that's been applied to this wall. We need to control this area a bit. This light needs some adjustment. Now if I come here and reduce the simple exposure, you'll see that the amount of light here is really too much. It would be much better if it were Select the light and go into the light's parameters. As you can see here, the color was chosen based on a simple color. I can set it to Kelvin temperature and actually adjust the color using the Kelvin degree, which is better to do it this way. If we go above 6,500, the color shifts toward blue, and the more we go below 6,500, for example, if I set it to 5,000, the color becomes warmer. And with the intensity option, we can also control the amount of light. All right, I'll gradually lower its value carefully until it reaches the amount I need. These lights are not instances of each other. I'll delete the lower light and make a copy of the upper light. By holding down the Shift key, I'll move it and set it to instance mode, then rotate my light 180 degrees. And I'll place it carefully at the very bottom, though it went a bit inside. All right, now it looks better, and I can make its color a bit warmer like this, and also adjust its intensity a bit until it reaches the level I have in mind. I want to change the material of this wall just a little bit since it already has a warm color. I'll go to the material editor, click the pick button, and select my material. As you can see, a warm color has been chosen for it in the color section. I can change that color slightly and choose a lighter color for it, and as you can see, my wall becomes lighter. All right, that's great. Now I can start controlling the lighting of my scene with the simple exposure. This plant doesn't really suit my scene, so I'll move on to something else. I'll use another option for this scene. Maybe, for example, this one is a better choice and fits my scene more effectively and appropriately. Of course, we can make changes like using one of these pots, bringing in one of those plants and replacing it with something else if needed. But right now, at this particular moment, I don't want to get caught up in those kinds of changes or adjustments. I'll just adjust the scale of my object a bit, making it slightly larger or smaller as needed, and that's great. If we need to have another light source in our scene, we can use the corona light. For example, here I want to add a ceiling light. We won't actually see the light object itself in the final render. We just want the illumination it creates in our work. So I go to the light settings, and as you can see, when I turn it off and then back on, we can observe its effect here. I'll make its color a bit lighter, in fact whiter, and a bit cooler in tone. If I increase its intensity, you can see its effect here becoming noticeably stronger, making the illuminated area brighter and more pronounced. And well, for example, we can use a light like this. Let's say there's a chandelier here in the scene. It's not necessary for us to actually see the object itself. I can go to its options, change its size, or adjust the shape of its emission, its intensity, its color. There are a bunch of different settings here. But as for the light source itself, we don't want to see it right now, so we can select it. If I place my light source inside here, since it goes inside the object, it won't be very visible. Maybe just a bit of its lighting effect will show, but when I bring it out, I can see the lighting effect as well. However, if I turn off visible directly here, I won't see the white of the light source itself anymore. But if it's on, there's an advantage. I can use the bloom and glare option here, and it becomes radiant, which can make our work much more attractive. You can clearly see this soft glowing effect that has been added right here to the image, and of course with the various options and settings that are available to us in this tool, we can easily make the glow weaker, less intense, and more limited, just like this. Alright, I'll increase the simple exposure a bit, use contrast, and with the white balance option, I can generally control the warmth or coolness of my work. There are other options as well. By enabling them, we can actually have our color settings here or use other options available to us here. We can use LUTs by turning them on. There are ready-made color presets that can really make our scene more attractive. They give us different color modes, and of course, we can control their intensity. and take a look and see which of these suits your work better and can make your project or your overall presentation more appealing. All right. Now I'll move on to the final render settings, and here is the render setup option, which you can see here. Most of the settings related to the Corona render engine are located in this section. So there are lighting settings, and there are also some settings related to denoising. For example, to denoise, we can use different options like the NVIDIA GPU AI option or the Intel CPU and GPU AI option. It provides us with a wide variety of different filters, each designed for specific purposes, so that we can address and fix some rendering issues that may arise, especially in complex animations, such as upscaling, denoising, or other advanced options that are available here in this section. For example, we can set specific limits for our render process, like stopping the render automatically when the noise level reaches 5%. Which is a common threshold for acceptable image quality, or we can choose to do this based on a set amount of time, depending on our needs. We also have the light mix option, which, if we set it up properly, usually we activate it in instance mode for more flexibility, allows us to control and adjust the color of our lights even after the rendering process is complete. The more different lights you have in your scene, the more separate layers will be created here, so you can control the scene's lighting accordingly and make fine adjustments to each light source. There are many other options available as well. We've already looked at Cosmos, worked with different types of lights, and worked with the camera settings. Now, regarding proxies, the objects in Cosmos are already proxied by default to make them lighter and more efficient, and for objects that will be used in large numbers, you can even use proxies to further optimize your scene. I'll try to explain each of these topics in separate dedicated tutorials so you can easily learn and understand them in detail. For now, my main goal was to quickly and simply build a scene together, review various features, and finally get a render. Keep in mind that a realistic render depends on the scene's details, the color of the materials, modeling details, material details, texture details, your lighting setup, your camera framing, and the more details you have in the scene, the closer your work gets to a realistic render. There are some options here that determine the render quality. The higher the resolution and the lower the noise level, the better the final render quality. For example, I might set a render to 3000 by 2250, which is considered an acceptable render. And by pressing the render button or the final render, we can turn the scene we want into a final render. Remember, achieving a high-quality photorealistic render is a process that involves careful attention to every aspect of your scene, from the smallest material detail to the overall composition and lighting. As you experiment with these settings and options, you'll gain a deeper understanding of how each one affects the final outcome, and you'll be able to create even more impressive and realistic renders in your future projects. The rendering process begins. We need to give it a little bit of time, just a short while, so that our noise level can gradually reach 500 and the render gets fully set up and ready. In the meantime, you can make use of the various options that are provided here in this interface. If you want, you can still adjust the bloom or glare option even during the rendering process itself, which is quite convenient. After the render is finished and completed, we can use the light mix option, or even during the render if you prefer. For example, I can turn off this particular light, or turn off the sunlight, or for instance, turn off the environment light. It's really that simple. We can turn off the different lights we have available depending on what we need. This flexibility allows you to experiment and see the effects in real time, making the process much more interactive and user-friendly. We can turn them back on again. For example, let's say I can decrease or increase the intensity of this light or change its color. You see, even after rendering, we can have a lot of control over our render until we achieve the desired result. For bloom glare, you need to give it a little time so it can process and show you the result. Like this. Okay, I'm going to lower this value now. Overall, its value is currently set a bit too high. It definitely needs to be reduced slightly. When you render your scene at a larger size, the intricate details and subtle features of your material become much more apparent and visible. That's why your render resolution has a significant impact on the final quality of your render. The higher the quality setting you choose to render at, the more fine details and subtle nuances you'll have available, and as a result, you can actually achieve a higher quality render overall. Okay. So I will go ahead and render this scene now at a higher resolution, so you can clearly see the difference in quality and detail that results from these adjustments. I'll stop it and wait for my render to finish so we can see the final result together. This was the simplest thing you can do in Corona. In the next parts, I'll go over different topics so you can do things much more professionally. This, in fact, can be considered the most basic or beginner way to work with the rendering engine, and just like that, you can get attractive and realistic renders. Now we're looking at the final result together. When you render at a large size and give it enough time to finish, the details in your final render become clear and your main texture will show up in that final render. I hope you enjoyed this part of the tutorial, got familiar with the Corona render engine, and in the next parts we'll talk more about different sections of the Corona render engine and more advanced techniques. Wishing you success.